We left off Pasuk Dalid, where Avram Avinu is adjuring his slave Eliezer. What is the oath? You should go to my land and my location of birth. And you should take a wife for my son, for Yitzchok. The slave said to him, maybe the woman, meaning even if I locate the right woman, she's not going to want to follow me back to that land. Shall I return your son to the land that you had left from there? That's the question they asked. Maybe the woman will not want to come back after me. Avram said to him, you must be very careful. Under no circumstance should you bring my son back there. The God who's the Almighty of heaven, who had taken me from the household of my father and the location of my birth, Ashedibali, and who had spoken to me, Vashenishbali Lemor, and had promised me, saying, Lazarch etin se'oretz hazos, he had said, I will give to your progeny this land. Hu yishlach malocho lefonecho. He will send his angel before you, and you will take the woman for my son from there. Meaning it's not to be concerned. He was saying it with certainty. God who promised me, he will send his angel. And as I mentioned yesterday, Eliezer wasn't aware that after the Akedah, Avram had a divine communication that Rivka was born, and Rivka was destined to be the wife of Yitzchok. So he was certain everything was in place. He just has to go. She'll be willing to come. But you have to go take the initiative to retrieve her from there. But again, he never shared with Eliezer this fact. Now, Rashi makes it a point. Over here, Avram refers to Hashem as Elokei Hashemayim, the God of heaven. So Rashi says, Lo Omar Elokei Oretz. Ulamalo Omar Vashviacha. When it came to Urim, he says, I'm imposing an oath on you from the God of heaven and earth. And yet, when he speaks about the God who would take me from my father's household and my birthplace, he only refers to Hashem as Elokei Hashemayim. Today, God is known not only in heaven, but even on the terrestrial level, he is known. Why is he known? Because I accustomed his presence in the mouth of mankind. Mankind now is aware that there is a God who controls the terrestrial level. He's not only in heaven, but he's known to all mankind. But initially, when I was taken from the house of my father, the members of humanity did not recognize him, and his name was not commonly known on the terrestrial level. Therefore, when he's referring to the one who had taken him from his household and from his land, then he was only Elokei Hashemayim. Today, he's Elokei Hashemayim Elokei Oretz. He's a known entity. Before we go further, as I mentioned from the beginning of the parsha, when he summoned his Eliezer, the Torah tells us, Vayomer Avram el Avdo. Avram spoke to his slave, the elder of his household, who oversaw all that he had. So he spoke to a slave. When Eliezer responds, and he tells him, do not take a wife, but rather from the land, from my birthplace, Vayom Elav Ho'eved. This is a Vayom Elav Eliezer. The slave spoke to him. Maybe the woman will not want to come back. Ulay Bosova Isha Lechas Achrei El Oretz Hazos. There's no mention of Eliezer in this whole parsha. With all the back and forth, the questions, the responses, and even when he goes, we'll see, and he prays that God should fulfill his mission. It's not that he should succeed in the mission, that Hashem should do chesed im Avraham. It's not that he has any basis to succeed because he wants to have that level of success, to have that level of acclaim. When he negotiates with Besuel, the father of Rivka, and Lavan, and he introduces himself, he says, Eved Avram Anochi. He doesn't say Eliezer, and he presents his credentials, and he says, I'm the chattel of Avram. No mention of him as a person. Who am I? I am Eved Avraham. I am the slave of Avram. That's the way that he introduces himself. Not that he's Moshe Mechol HaShelo, not that he oversees all of his holdings, he's the elder of his household. Nothing, no mention of his levels of accomplishment. That he's Damesk Eliezer, that he's the one who disseminates the Torah of his master, none of that. All I am, Eved Avram Anochi. I am the slave of Avram, nothing more than that. No, there's a famous story of Chaim Volozhiner, who was the closest student of the Vilna Gaon, and so you could imagine his level of Torah, both in the revealed Torah and the hidden Torah, what we call the Kabbalah, who had founded the Yeshiva in Volozhin, which was a small town in Lithuania, and the greatest Torah sages graduated and were mentored in that yeshiva under the tutelage of Rav Chaim Volozhiner. He was visiting a city, wherever the city was, and they asked him, you see a person looks like a rabbi, an unfamiliar face, and say, who are you? So he said, I am a Melamed. That was his response. I'm a Melamed. I'm a teacher. You know, in Europe, Melamed was a little bit of a derogatory term. One who taught for a few kopecks, small children, was called a Melamed. So he introduced himself as Melamed. I mean, here he's the closest student of Vilna Gaon. He established the Volozhin Yeshiva. He mentored the greatest Torah scholars in Europe, and when he introduced himself, he said, I'm a Melamed. That's what he says. So ladies, there for a while, word gets out that this is Rav Chaim Volozhiner, the Yeshiva of Volozhin, the closest student of Vilna Gaon, and all the great rabbis and sages throughout all Europe, they are his students. So they went over to him and said, if actually you are the Yeshiva of Volozhin, and you mentored all these great Talmidei Chachamim, why did you refer to yourself as a Melamed? That's the question they said to him. There's a certain degree of untruth. You're much more than a Melamed. So you say, for the sake of humility, you're permitted to alter the truth. Maybe. So he said something much better than that. He says, every morning we say Birchas HaTorah. The first blessing of Birchas Torah, how does it conclude? You say two brachos in the morning. Baruch Ato Hashem hamalami Torah lama Yisrael. Blessed are you, Hashem, who is the malami Torah lama Yisrael, who teaches Torah to his people Israel. So he said, if God himself refers to himself as Malamed. I should refer myself as Malamed. Therefore, within the word Malamed means the ultimate. It's only based on the question, how do you understand what that means? But there's no untruth in being a Malamed. Rather than saying for the sake of humility, of course, he said it for the sake of humility, but within the word Malamed, that includes even the greatest Torah sage is called Malamed. If God could call himself Malamed, he referred to himself as Malamed. Many years ago, went to a wedding in Cleveland when my Rosh Hashanah's grandson was married. And he was, after Chatzkel Levenstein, Zechat Tzaddik Livrocha, who was the Mir Mashgiach from Europe, he was the next in line at that level. Rav Chatzkel Levenstein wanted my Mashgiach that after he would pass away, he should come to Panovich in Israel and assume his position. He wasn't interested. He wasn't going to leave Baltimore. He was somebody who was proficient in Shas. He was the posek. He was this Muslim personality. So he comes to Cleveland, and people ask him, "Who are you?" And in those days, he didn't wear a frock, wore a short jacket. Although his hat was brim up, didn't wear a Hamburg. So they said, "Who are you?" He says, "I'm a Rebbe." Later, it was found out that he's the famous Mashgiach of Baltimore, Neisel. So they said to him, "Isn't that question?" So he's the one who told over the story about Reb Chaim Volozhiner, that when they asked him who he was, he says he's a Mlamed. So he says, "I'm a Rebbe." He could be a high school Rebbe, he could be an elementary school Rebbe, or he could be more of a Rebbe. But rather than identify himself what he was, that's the expression of humility. That's who I am. But the question is, a person like Eliezer, not once in the whole narrative here, from the time that he summoned even Avram Avinu, he said to his slave responded. When he prays, nobody's there, he's by himself. He says, "You should do chesed im Adoni Avram. You should send the right woman to be the wife of my master's son and do a chesed with Adoni Avram, my master Avram. What about myself? I'm sent on this mission. Give me that divine assistance that I should succeed in the mission." His level of negation to Avram was all what it's all about is you should do chesed with Adoni Avram. Nothing else. No other reason. Not that I should show that I have any value. What does that mean? When you speak, your master speaks to you, he calls the Eved. Okay, it's one thing. You respond as the Eved. So that's the interaction between the slave and the master. But here he's speaking privately between him and God. Do chesed im Adoni Avram. When he comes to Lavan and Besuel, and he presents his credentials, who am I? Eved Avram Anochi. That's who I am. What is all this all about? Eved Avram Anochi. The man is able to run every corporation in the United States simultaneously. You know, I am. I'm the slave of Avram. Those are my credentials. I mean, how do you suppress the reality of who you are? The answer is, in truth, in terms of the way he saw his master Avram, he was negated and he paled to whatever his master was. That's an indication of what degree he revered his master. I always explain the word yira means fear. Now, as we studied in the Mesilas Yesharim, fear means you're frightened because you could harm me, or fear could come as a result of awe. He's awe-stricken. But even awe is not because the other individual could actually harm you physically, but there's fear. You come before a great king and you're very nervous. You're fearful. The man will never see you again. This is the first time he sees you, it will be the last time he sees you. And even if something is not perfect, there'll be no consequence. But yet, you're fearful. What are you afraid? What the answer is all, because when you realize and understand who this man is, his power, what he represents, somehow it strikes fear in the person's heart. That's called being awe-stricken. What's the basis for awe? Every morning we say in the davening, right after Birchas HaShachar, we speak about Kol HaChachamim Ka'ayin lefonech. All the wise men are like nothing in your presence. Kol HaNevonim Kvili HaSkel. Those who have this profound understanding, in-depth understanding, it's like they have no intelligence. Ka'ayin, without brains, literally. What does that mean? You could be Shlomo Melech, that his genius was not to be fathomed. But in the presence of God, what is he? He's nothing. God has infinite wisdom, genius. Whatever your genius is, finite. And if you recognize who you are and who he is, it's not you pale. You don't exist. Ka'ayin. The word ayin means non-existent. I am not existent in your presence. That's what it is. And that's a reality. And that's the reality. The question is, do you recognize it? Do you internalize that reality? That's your ka'ayin lefonech. But if you do, then you have fear. You have tremendous fear. That's all causes fear. Why does it cause fear? So I always say this, that what gives a person a sense of himself, a sense of person, a sense of confidence, your levels of accomplishment in life, who you are, what have you accomplished? That's how a person gives himself value and quantifies himself based on his accomplishments in life. My education, my character, my my acts of kindness, my family, the way other people see me, that gives me value. When a person has a sense of value, self-value, what we call self-esteem, it gives a person that sense of being. What happens in one moment? What you believe had value, you realize has no value whatsoever. You thought being able to read, to be literate is a great accomplishment. Now you find yourself among people who are endlessly more than just literate, educated, knowledgeable, accomplished, everything. What are you? People who wouldn't even look at you. You're nothing. You realize what you believe was value was not value. In one moment, what are you reduced to? Whatever you thought was is nothing. Immediately, your sense of self, and when you lose your sense of self, immediately fear starts seeping in. Therefore, when you negate it to the king, you're awe-stricken because you realize who you're standing before. And if you have an understanding who Hashem is, regardless of your accomplishment, regardless of your genius, regardless of anything, it's ka'ayin lefonech. Kol ha'chachamim ka'ayin lefonech. We say this every morning. Kol ha'nevonim kivli haskel. Those who have this in-depth understanding are able to extrapolate and make associations. Kivli haskel, you have no intelligence. It's like you were never endowed with any level of intelligence. And that's a reality. Of course, finite, regardless what that finite is, versus infinite, it's zero. The word is ayin, nothing. Especially when you realize he's the endower. He endows you whatever you have. So what am I? I'm nothing. You're a shell, and even the shell, he wills the shell. The relationship between Eliezer and his master, regardless what he was, Zakan Beso, Moshe Chalashalo, he was the elder of his household, he oversaw all his financial affairs, all his issues, whatever they were. But you know, Avram is Avam Goyim. He's the one who's the closest human being to Hashem. He's the one, as we said, who achieved the level of advancement within spirituality that he was able to actually to affect the evil of Eitz Hadas, and he merited circumcision. And Eliezer was circumcised because he was his chattel. So who am I? Who am I? Zakan Beso, Moshe Chalashelo. My levels of accomplishment, as I said, they pale, or the word pale is saying too much in terms of Avram Avinu. Therefore, when he calls Avdo, he calls his slave, it's not an insult. It's a privilege. You know, David HaMelech says, Eved Hashem Anochi. Avdi. Moshe is called Avdi. Moshe Avdi. You know what Moshe Rabbeinu was? No human being ever walked the face of the earth as Moshe Rabbeinu, in terms of being self-accomplished. Self-made. Moshe is Eved Hashem. And he's referred to as Moshe Avdi. What is Avdi? Is that an insult? Insult. It's the ultimate pride. Moshe Avdi. God, the creator, refers to me as, you recognize that you are totally dedicated to me. And I value your levels of accomplishment. That you have no identity. What did Moshe say? Nachnu mo. What am I? Mo. I mean, the Chazal go and differentiate between Moshe's humility, Avram's humility, and David HaMelech's humility. Moshe Rabbeinu said, Nachnu mo. What am I? What are we? Nothing. Avram Avinu said when he entered into the dialogue with Hashem for Sodom, Anochi ofa ve'efer. I am dust, I am ash. Dust and ash is more than nothing. Although it has no value, it has no life, nothing. What does David say? Anochi tolev Eloish. I'm a worm, I'm not a person. That is who I am. I'm a worm. This is the three levels of humility. Avram himself, what did he consider himself versus God? Anochi ofa ve'efer. But this person who's ofa ve'efer, or the one who says Nachnu mo, when he had to destroy Og and Sichon, the two giants, that the world actually melted in their presence. That was that power. He destroyed both of them. And the whole world stood in awe of Moshe Rabbeinu when this happened. So the most humble person who considers himself that he's nothing, he's everything. Avram Avinu was Avdi. Being referred to Eved Hashem, it's not an insult, it's not a put down. So Eliezer being referred to as the Eved of Avram Avinu. If you recognize what that means, it's the ultimate pride. And he internalized that reality. Therefore, throughout this narrative, from the beginning of the parsha till the end, there's no mention of Eliezer by name. He's summoned, he calls us Eved. Vayomer Eved. You should do chesed Adoni Avram, with my master. Not that I should be recognized that I accomplished anything. When he comes to Besuel and Lavan, the father of Rivka, to begin the negotiations, Eved Avram Anochi. These are his credentials. Give you an example. Person is Secretary of State of the United States at one time. Today, I'm not sure. You know? And he comes and he presents his credentials. And when he was chosen, his past was chairman of the board of GM, General Motors, or whatever it is. And now he's coming as the representative of the United States, of America, the president of the United States. He says, do you know who I am? It's irrelevant. When you're coming as being the Secretary of State, I am the Secretary of the State. That's it. That's where it begins. That's where it ends. Everything else doesn't make a difference. Lahavdil. So when Eliezer speaks, understanding who I am and what role I play, but even more so, but the reality is what he felt versus his master, it's a privilege to be identified as Eved Avram Anochi. I am the slave of Avram. And he's fully that. I said something interesting yesterday. We find it's almost like an insult. Eliezer proved himself to his master. You couldn't be more dedicated than Eliezer to Avram Avinu. As we say, He entrusted him with everything. And yet, when it came to find the appropriate wife for Yitzchak, he adjures him with the oath, Elokei Shamayim v'Elokei Oretz. And in fact, if in any way he deviates from this agency, he forfeits everything. The physical, the spiritual. Meaning there's no wiggle room to any degree. So yesterday we explained why. So we said because when we're speaking about the destiny of Klal Yisrael, which is meeting the objective of creation, which only comes through the patriarch and the matriarch, it has to be the appropriate woman. If she's not the appropriate woman to be the matriarch, it will manifest itself that Klal Yisrael will not be at the level they should be. Therefore, this is something, anything else, although I entrusted to you everything, it's meaningless, doesn't mean anything. Therefore, this has to be guaranteed beyond any doubt that you will succeed in your mission. And if you feel you can't, then we'll cancel it. You can walk away from it. That's the way Avram spoke to Eliezer. That's what we explained yesterday. I was thinking yesterday, we find whenever there's going to be a transition, they're going to another level of status and reality, there's always the interference of Satan. Always. The Jews, after Kabbalas Torah, second year of the desert, what happens? All of a sudden, they get this crazy idea. We need spies. We got to send scouts into Eretz Yisrael. And say they're literally about to go in. Before we go, we'd like to check it out first. What happens? It's disastrous. They wandered for the next 40 years. That whole generation who stood at Sinai die. Only the new generation's coming in. It's the 40th year of the desert. What happens? And the Torah makes a statement. The old generation is no longer here. This is the new generation. And they're about to go in. All of a sudden, another crazy thing comes to their heads. As we have somebody here who lives in Israel, a juk. They have a juk in their head. Alan, we need a psychiatrist for this one. Okay? What happens? We've been eating the mun for 40 years. We haven't done our bodily functions. You know something? Who knows? Maybe this whole thing is a ploy. This mun will expand in our intestines, and we're going to die because our intestines are going to burst. Where are you coming from? After 40 years, and these people were less than 20 when the Chet HaMerakim happened, many of them, and the others, but what you've seen and your whole environment. I mean, how do you even come up with such a so far-fetched concern or worry? Who put that in your head? What happens? We had enough of this wafer food. It's lechem haklokel. We want to eat the real thing. Yeah, we want to put our heads into, we want to go to the grub wagon, the way they used to call it, the grub wagon. Okay? That's what we want. I mean, here you have such spiritual food, miraculous. You want to eat. We want the real thing, the real food. What does Hashem do? He sends vipers, and they're bitten. People are dying. Moshe Rabbeinu makes a copper snake. They look up at the snake, whatever it is, and they admit they sinned, but eventually they go in. There's always, when there's going to be this new level of advancement, spiritually speaking, Satan intervenes. He's about the top of the apple cart. He did it with the Meraglim. Avraham Avinu understands at this moment what's going to happen if Eliezer succeeds in his mission. The matriarch will be provided for Yitzchak, that this will be another underpinning of the foundation of Klal Yisrael. Satan will do whatever he can to prevent this from happening. Avraham Avinu has to take every precaution. He has to write such a tight contract. Eliezer is dedicated as he is, but he's still a human being. Al tam ba'atzchad yom moscho. Even the other Kadoshim, you can't rely on yourself till the moment you're no longer alive, because we're still subject to the influence of the Satan. So Eliezer, who's not, this is even Avraham Avinu. He was only referred to as Elkei Avraham only after he passed away. So Eliezer as great as he is, he's not Avram. And Avram, we don't refer to Elokei Avram, because he could be subject to the Satan. So Eliezer, so what does Avram have to do? He binds him with an oath that it's so exact and so binding, as I said, no wiggle room. It's only because of that. And what do we find when Eliezer finally goes? What do they try? They try to poison him. They would offer him a meal. He says, before I eat, I have to address my mission. And he begins speaking. Afterwards, there's no mention of the soil. What happened? When he sat down for the meal, they had poisoned his food. Hashem sent an angel and switched the food. That Eliezer's portions were given to Besuel, and Besuel ate it, he died. You understand what's going on? You're dealing with people over here. Because if this happens, it's disastrous for Satan. That means Satan lost another battle. He lost the Akedah. What does he do? He takes Suriname. He tries to topple the apple cart, as we explained. Because in any way, if he has regrets that he did the Akedah, as the Rambam says, that whole record is wiped out. Over here also. And Avram succeeded. He's kept silent, not a word. Eliezer, he has, as much as he's negated to his master, Satan still has what to say. And he doesn't leave a stone unturned to upturn and overturn the apple cart. That's why Avram bound Eliezer with such an oath. As dedicated as he was, as spiritual as he was, he's Damesik Eliezer. He's Dodo Masker Mitorah Sharabo. He draws from the wellsprings of Avram's Torah. He radiated holiness. Doesn't make a difference. Avram still has to do what he has to do. And Eliezer, understanding this, there's no insult, not only because he's negated to his master, because he's the Eved, because he understands the importance and the value of this mission. You know, we read in the Parsha that when Rivka was coming with Eliezer, she was on the camel. It says she was like, when she saw the countenance of Yitzhak, she was like overwhelmed. And it says she slipped off the camel. So the Midrash tells us that when she slipped off the camel, what happened? She was injured and she lost her virginity. That's what happened. And now when Yitzhak goes and consummates the marriage, you realize she's not a virgin. Yeah, that's what's going on. And he suspected that maybe Eliezer had relations with her on the way back. That's why she was no longer a virgin. Immediately, Hashem sends Gabriel, the archangel, to bring the stone which had the blood on it of that injury, to prove that Eliezer was innocent, totally innocent, and she's pure. Nobody had defiled her. That's a midrash. You understand? She fell the last moment. Satan wants to topple the apple cart. Here he finally makes it out of the clutches of Lavan, Besuel, this evil group. He's about, ready, mission accomplished. It's not accomplished till it's accomplished. Only Hashem had to send Gabriel to bring that stone to prove that the reason why she didn't have a virginity was due to that injury. And it says in the Midrash that initially, why did Hashem say that Eliezer his daughter was not qualified to be the matriarch? Because since he was from Chum, who was from a cursed stock, and Yitzhak is from blessed stock, you can't build a Klal Yisrael on a cursed stock. So what was Eliezer's? As great as he was still, his pedigree was Chum. Because of what he was suspect of something, there was no basis to be suspect of. Hashem had converted him from a cursed stock to a blessed stock. And he became Baruch at that moment, due to this baseless accusation or suspect that maybe, God forbid, that he somehow had relations with Rivka. But you see what something does. We're there ready. Not so simple. Until you totally have it in your hand, tightly in your hand, he could steal it away from you. to such a degree.
The tent was Hashem's confirmation to Yitzchak that this was